When US pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021, it signaled to the world a potential sign of US hegemony weakening as America's ability to project its power proved to be a failure. The United States also lost access to certain natural resources that it was extracting from Afghanistan, such as opium, rare earth metals, and oil. But probably the biggest consequence of America pulling out of Afghanistan is actually the long-term geopolitical consequence, not just for the United States, but for the world, which we are actually finally beginning to see the manifestations of. Recently, India announced a new 10-year partnership with Iran. The goal of this partnership is to develop Iran's port, which will connect India's trading route to the heart of Central Asia through Afghanistan, without needing to go through Pakistan. This deal will also connect Russia through the international north-south transport corridor, essentially giving Russia access to additional trading route, which will continue to strengthen the country despite sanctions. This plan was never really able to actualize for a long time due to the instability of Afghanistan and sanctions and forced isolation of Iran by the United States. Yet it is precisely because of the Iranians joining BRICS, which has given opportunity for Iran and India to facilitate this deal, as well as Taliban victory over the United States, that have opened up the options for this new trading route to actualize. And this of course not only legitimizes BRICS as an organization, but also legitimizes Taliban rule over Afghanistan, which the US actively opposes. This new partnership presents a big problem for the United States and the West because it greatly strengthens the Iranians, which is a country that the United States has been trying to weaken for some time now with various sanctions as well as attacks. Also, a stronger Iran means a stronger Syria led by the Assad government, as they are close partners. And this not only means that America's grip in the Middle East weakens, but it also puts allies like Israel in a really bad place, especially because countries like Iran and Syria have been a threat to its existence for a while now. This new economic cooperation between Iran, India, and Afghanistan has created some panic in Washington, D.C., with US potentially considering sanctions against India. The United States has been having trouble getting India fully on board to their side, especially as tensions rise between the United States and China. And this signals to the US that India will not fully commit to the US side, but rather do its own thing. Meanwhile, this plan also significantly weakens Pakistan's position, as Iran, India, and Afghanistan has been slowly choking the country. For example, Pakistan has been having sectarian violence between Shia and Sunni Muslims within the country, and Iran has been actively supporting the Shia side, which the Pakistani government has labeled as terrorist organizations. There's also been military engagement between Pakistan and Iran as well, with the relationship between the two countries deteriorating. The main adversary to Pakistan is India, and tensions between India and Pakistan isn't new, as we still see fightings flare up within the disputed regions. Meanwhile, tensions between Taliban and Pakistan has hit a new high recently, with two countries launching attacks against each other. A stronger India, Iran, and even Afghanistan thanks to economic cooperation is not something Pakistan can deal with right now, and it could leave Pakistan stretched too thin to deal with hostilities in nearly every direction. Meanwhile, the consequence of Taliban victory in Afghanistan for China is massive. One of the key parts of China's Belt and Road Initiative is an economic corridor that goes from Xinjiang all the way into Europe through Pakistan and Kazakhstan. However, thanks to Taliban victory, China has gained an alternative route for the Belt and Road through Afghanistan. China was in fact one of the first countries that Taliban declared partnership with, and China is beginning to pour tons of money into Afghanistan to develop this corridor. This of course is a serious issue for the United States because China gaining access to an alternative trading route means that China's Belt and Road Initiative becomes more stable. The sheer amount of economic benefit that China will gain from the Belt and Road Initiative will strengthen China and threaten the US position as the hegemonic power. Additionally, the Belt and Road Initiative becoming more of a reality means that China has other options besides maritime trade routes, which the US controls through a large military presence. The United States relies on being able to choke China's maritime trade access in places like the South China Sea and the Malacca Strait in case a war breaks out between China and the United States. So for China, Taliban's victory turns out to be a massive win, not only because they're given more options for their Belt and Road, but because they're also economically gaining from the trading of natural resources that are rich in Afghanistan. Additionally, the US defeat in Afghanistan could eventually even cause India and China's relationship to improve. India and China has been having a deadly border conflict for a while now, and one thing that is rarely talked about when discussing the border conflict between China and India is that the border problem is actually more than just the borders. It's also the fact that China is legitimizing Pakistan's control over disputed Kashmir, which India sees as their rightful territory, by building highways that connect China and Pakistan together. And it's also the fact that India is legitimizing the status of exiled Tibetan government and the Dalai Lama against China. In fact, the disputed borders, as important as it is, isn't actually worth the tarnished relationship between China and India, because you actually lose out more in the long run due to the lack of cooperation. Yet the border issue is hard to resolve because it comes with all sorts of other issues that's very difficult to solve. However, it's possible that both countries could come to the negotiating table. For India, they might be willing to make some concessions to significantly weaken Pakistan's relationship with its only neighboring ally. It's very unlikely for India to ever be able to break Pakistan and China apart, especially given how strong the history of China-Pakistan relations is. However, merely establishing a closer relationship between China and India means that China is way less likely to help Pakistan if any conflict with India were to happen. Additionally, with India establishing a closer relationship with Afghanistan and Iran, and even supporting Russia, they would want to use the threat of a closer relationship with China to make the United States think twice about a potential retaliation, especially as the United States absolutely does not want to see China and India working together. So even that alone should make India be much more willing to communicate with China rather than heightening tensions. For China, Taliban-controlled Afghanistan means that they have another trade route and don't need to rely as much on Pakistan. There's also the added encouragement from China's other allies like Iran and Russia for the country to fix its relationship with India. It's also within the interest of BRICS organization for China and India to get along. Additionally, the ongoing trade war between the West and China means that China could really benefit from the growing economic cooperation with India. So in this case, even China might be willing to make concessions to India as well for the benefits. What matters in these negotiations is that both countries are willing to make some sacrifices and are willing to communicate with each other. And recent reports suggest that there is a huge progress being made behind the scenes between China and India. Prime Minister Modi recently did comment that resolving the disputed territorial issue with China as soon as possible is important. And China has not only reciprocated Prime Minister Modi's comments, but they've also revealed since then that there has been positive progress towards resolving the border issues, with even the Indian Minister of Defense coming out just this week on May of 2024, hinting at a big progress behind the scenes that would make India proud. Because everything is happening behind closed doors, it's hard to know the full picture of development in resolving the border crisis between the two countries, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on as things progress. And there might not be an opportunity like this ever again, as it was only possible thanks to the domino effect of US defeat in Afghanistan. It's only been 3 years since US has left and Taliban has taken control of Afghanistan, and yet we're beginning to see pretty big consequences. A stronger Iran and even Syria due to the establishment of economic corridor and development of trading ports that connects India, Afghanistan, and Iran together. The rise of BRICS as a legitimate organization that supports dialogue in the developing multipolar world. The legitimization of Taliban's control over Afghanistan, India's rise as an independent force away from the United States, Russia potentially gaining access to more trade routes to escape sanctions from the consequence of the Ukraine conflict, an increasingly vulnerable Pakistan, which its neighbors could potentially exploit, additional partners for China's Belt and Road Initiative, alongside China's access to resources in Afghanistan, and more. A lot of things I said can change as we are still in the early stages, especially as the consequences are just beginning to unfold. But there is a reason why US stayed in Afghanistan for so long. The importance of Afghanistan goes far beyond natural resources, as Afghanistan is by far one of the most strategically important regions to control in order to contain several powers. And with US losing it, the consequence is massive, and it is entirely possible that people will look back at America's loss in Afghanistan as a pivotal point in history where everything began to unwind.